What you see before you is probably one of the most, if not the most controversial artifact that we have in our museum space. A lot of folks can't even imagine that there was an incredibly large presence of the KKK.
Mrs. Johnny Armstead was the founder, and we were friends. And when she started the museum, she asked me to be on the first board, and that was in 1997. Well, Mrs. Armstead was a collector. Even before she started the museum, she had several storage units built on her property, and in those units she kept artifacts that she collected that were related to African Americans in San Marcos. Mrs. Armstead went before the city council and persuaded them to allow her to solicit funds to renovate this old building, because she grew up here and she knew the history of this building in the Black community. And so the city council was receptive to her idea. And in 1997, after several years of renovation, the Calaboose African American History Museum was opened. When integration started, Black businesses here in this community pretty much dried up, certainly in the 60s. Integration was good, certainly, in a way, but it devastated Black businesses. San Marcos was what I call a Klan-friendly town. They worked like a Masonic lodge. There were groups of Klan memberships, and we had one here in San Marcos. The number is over there. I forget what number it was. But they were very well received. They would encourage their members to go to church. They were very much like the Rotary Club or the Kiwanis Club. You just can't imagine, when you think of the history of the Klan and how well they were received here. They were just like normal people, and they were terrorists, really. They cleaned themselves up very well here, and so nobody thought apparently anything bad about them. They donated to the hospital. When the local hospital was building a new wing, the local Klan was one of the groups that donated money to the building of the hospital. So they were very much above board. Everybody, you think of the Klan as being a group that people would not want to be associated with, but not here. They were very well received. And in 1926, 20,000 Klansmen marched here in San Marcos in celebration, and they had a great picnic here, a very huge picnic where they had barbecue and games and all kinds of food and speeches, just a lot of activity here. Because Texas and some other southern states were noted for racial discrimination in voting, they were under this kind of monitoring to make sure they didn't do something wrong and limit Black voting. But recently, the Supreme Court said that's no longer necessary. That was old. People aren't doing that anymore. But there's still a lot of that kind of conduct going on, and so it's going to be more difficult for Black folk to get justice in voting, even in 2020. People discriminate and give Blacks longer jail sentences, and yet they don't think they're doing anything wrong. They convince themselves that Blacks deserve it. The criminal justice system dealt with Black folk who were caught up in the crack epidemic. The solution for them was incarceration. They said, let put as many of these black folk on crack in jail as possible. But then you fast forward to today and look at the opioid situation, and that involves white people mostly. It's more white folk on that than black folk. And now they're saying, let's give them treatment. And so they're doing everything they can to try, and I agree, you should help them. And so they are treating them very differently than they did the crack folk. Declaration of Independence, Jefferson says what all men are created equal, but that didn't include slaves. So we just need legislation. I think you can't expect people to change the way they think about other folk. You know, they're not just going to wake up one morning and say, let's all be equal to black folk. No, that's not going to happen. I think we need legislation that will ensure that black folk and other minorities will have an equal and level playing field. And there are so many folk who are weary of talking about race. It makes them tired. They're done with it. They don't want to talk about race anymore. But yet, those of us who face those kinds of situations daily know that George Floyd is not the only one. It's still happening. And those of us who are black didn't see that as unusual. That's been happening for 400 years. It was a point of embarrassment, I think, for the United States. No, we don't like to accept that identity. Not in America, we don't do that. Floyd was just lying there, pleading for his life. Now, what else could he do? And so his death was a turning point, I think, in how America views itself. I don't like to hear people say they're trying to eliminate racism. That's the wrong goal. We will never eliminate racism. As long as the world lives, as long as the world survives, racism is going to survive as well. We've been doing this 400 years, and racism is just as strong today as it was in 1619. But we have to learn how to accept the fact that it's going to be with us.